right now inside to Adam Silver for his annual finals news conference.
Thrilled to be here for these finals. You've written so much about them already. Again, having a first seed against an 8th seed just adds that much more intrigue to the competition. I think they both had separate, interesting paths to make it here. To have a play-in team, obviously in the Miami Heat, be here, and one that, as Coach Spoelstra said, struggled in many ways throughout the season, but what did he said? Something along the lines, but embraced the grind of the regular season. Had a lot of injuries they had to overcome. I think the Miami Heat lost the third most games, players to injuries over the course of the season, but here they are. And, it's interesting, something also I've been thinking about are the similarities, despite them being the first and the 8th seed. One, again, beginning with ownership. You have the Kroenke family and the RSN family. I think with both the RSNs have been involved with ownership a few years longer than the Kroenkes, but both then with Stan and Josh, you have a father and son combination, with Josh, of course, taking on the presidency of the team. Same thing with the RSNs, where, Mickey and then, of course, Nick is the CEO of the organization and work together as a fantastic team. And both families are very engaged with the league office, serve on several committees, and don't miss anything that goes on in the league. In terms of star players on both teams, of course, you have two, essentially late round draft picks, and Jokic, a second rounder, the 41st pick, and Jimmy at the end of the first round is the 30th pick. And I think that's a great story for basketball fans everywhere. And Coach Spoelstra and Malone, you have two of the coaches with, longest longevity in the league. Eric has the second longest tenure, and Michael the fourth longest tenure. A lot to be said there. And again, and just the markets, to roughly, around the same mid-sized markets in the league. I think that's intriguing too. It, I think, speaks a lot to the competitiveness in this league and the fact that we've come up with a system now working closely with the Players Association and all the teams where I like to think every team in this league has a shot to compete for a championship. And we saw in this season in particular, it was a record with, just a little over a week left in the season. You had 26 teams still competing for the playoffs. And as I said, that's a record. One sad note I want to point out, with the exception of those COVID seasons, this will be the first season that Bill Russell won't be here to present his namesake trophy to the finals MVP. Players honored him throughout this year with the number 6 on their jerseys. That will be the same for the jerseys in the finals. And of course, his number 6 remains on the arena floor. He's someone that everyone who here, I know many of you in the media knew him well. And was someone, I got to spend an enormous amount of time with over, my 30 plus years with the league. So, just wanted to mark his passing again and his impact on the league. Lastly, say that appreciate the amount of international coverage of those who traveled to be here in the finals. I know it's not an easy trip when the cities, of course, aren't known till relative last minute. But these games will be carried in 214 countries and territories in 60 different languages. And on top of that, we continue to have an enormous, measured in billions of followers globally on social media. So this tremendous anticipation for these finals. And with that, Tim, happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Great. We're going to start in row 1 on the left here. Tim?
Hi, I'm Tim Reynolds, Associated Press. You touched on it, obviously, but the competitive balance right now in the league. I mean, there were probably 16 teams who thought they had a legitimate chance to win when the playoffs started. What is the tangible benefit of that, if any, for the league? Not that 4 years of Golden State Cleveland was a bad thing, of course, but is there a benefit to unpredictability from the start of the season to the end?
Well, Tim, I think there's enormous benefit. And I get the question asked too, sort of the converse of that question is, are dynasties good for the league? And my ultimate view is competition is great for the league, and if, as a result, dynasties are made, I think that's great too. So I'm not against seeing repeat championships. On the other hand, whoever wins this year will be it'll be the fifth consecutive year where we have a new team winning a championship. And so when you think about a 30-team league, and it's not just the fans in those markets, but fans increasingly all over the world who follow a team in that particular market, maybe because they have affinity for that style of play or a particular player on that team or some creative connection to that city, you want a league where everyone feels that if the team that they are rooting for is well managed and gets a little bit lucky too, that's necessary, that they can truly compete for championships. So I think this increased parity we're seeing around the league is fantastic. And it's part by design too. Through successive collective bargaining agreements, and the one we just negotiated, there's some new provisions in that one as well that we hope, will help even the playing field to a certain extent. And it's important to point out as well that we only can make those changes with the partnership and cooperation of the players, and we sit down with them. In a way, they're not that different than fans. I mean, you have the greatest players in the world coming together on 30 different teams. They want to compete too. And at the end of the day, they want a level playing field. I mean, they, of course, also want the opportunity to become free agents and the opportunity to potentially move to a different market depending on the circumstances. But we both have the same interest at the end of the day. And just lastly, I think something I pointed out before, it's changes in the CBA, which I think have been effective to a certain degree. But also, there's societal changes because of social media and the amount of distribution that, in terms of players being able to get the recognition, I think it's less important as it was in the old days to be in particular markets. I mean, we're seeing that. Nikola Jokic, clearly a global superstar, two-time MVP, playing here in Denver. And because of the success Miami has had, sometimes people think of it, frankly, as a larger market than it actually is. So I'm pleased with it, and I recognize that there's a bit of randomness to it too, but we're seeing a really, I think, positive trend line in terms of competition.
First row, second in, Malika.
Hi, Malika.
How are you?
Good.
Malika Andrews, ESPN. Someone that we've come to expect to see in these finals is referee Eric Lewis, and obviously he's in the midst of an investigation into a second burner Twitter account. I'm wondering where that investigation stands, where you expect it to go, and how it was decided that he wouldn't participate in these finals as that is ongoing.
We decided that given that investigation was ongoing and it remains ongoing, that it wouldn't be appropriate for him to work in these finals. And I don't know what the ultimate conclusion will be. We'll see where the facts take us.
Fourth row in the middle, Jeff. Give the microphone to Jeff, please.
Hi, Jeff.
Jeff Zilgate, USA Today. Adam, there's another investigation involving John Morant, and can you update us on where you are on the timeline, when you expect it to end? And since there seems to be not a lot of precedent for this situation, how do you assess what kind of punishment to deliver, if indeed there is a punishment here?
So in assessing what discipline is appropriate, if that's the case, we look at both the history of prior acts, but then we look at the individual player's history as well. And so and the seriousness, of course, of the conduct. So those are all things that get factored. It's not an exact science. It comes down to judgment at the end of the day on the part of me and my colleagues in the league office. In terms of the timing, we've uncovered a fair amount of additional information. I think since I was still asked about the situation, I would say we probably could have brought it to a head now, but we made the decision, and I believe the Players Association agrees with us, that it would be unfair to these players and these teams in the middle of the series to announce the results of that investigation. And given that we're, of course, in the off season, he has now been suspended by the Memphis Grizzlies indefinitely, and so nothing would have changed anyway in the next few weeks. It seemed better to park that at the moment, at least any public announcement. And my sense now is that shortly after the conclusion of the finals, we will announce the outcome of that investigation.
All right, first row, second in, Mike.
Hi, Adam. Mike Singer, Denver Post. The majority of Nuggets fans have been unable to watch the Nuggets for the past 4 seasons due to the ongoing altitude Comcast impasse. Why do you think progress has been so slow going throughout that time? And from a broader perspective, if that model doesn't work, what does the future of local NBA broadcasting look like?
I think ultimately progress has been so slow based on something that Stan Kroenke himself said to me even back more than a year ago, which is the situation here has been a bit of the canary in the mine in terms of the breakdown of the regional sports network model. And so, of course, what followed then, this impasse, was ultimately the bankruptcy of the so-called Diamond RSNs, 16 others. And it's a terrible situation. The league office has tried to mediate several times between the parties. You know, it's a commercial dispute, and there hasn't been a simple resolution to it. I know there's no doubt it's bad for fans, of course, and the team recognizes that. It's my hope, though, and one of the things that's changed considerably since this dispute has started is the advent of many more streaming platforms, better digital streaming technology. And as we now embark on our negotiations for our new, what we used to call our national deals, we have 2 years left with our existing partners. I think Bill Koenig is here, our president of media. It's a problem we have to fix. I mean, I hope this is a period we look back on, and as we say, we went through a transition and we got to a place where a fan, frankly, wherever they are, can watch every game. And, you know, most likely it'll be through some sort of digital offering. When you think about those digital platforms, there's obviously no constraint in terms of individual channels or anything else. But it frustrates me because I think of it's a broken economic model where you have demand and the supply isn't there. And clearly, especially with a leading number, 1 seed team, finals caliber team here in Denver, the notion that local fans can't watch the games. I have, incidentally, a brother who lives in Boulder, so I hear from him and his family all the time. So it makes no sense, and it's on us to fix it.
All right, we're going to go second row, middle. Rachel?
Hey, Rachel.
Hey, Adam. Rachel Nichols from Showtime. It's been reported that in the new CBA that takes effect this summer, that there will be a 65-game minimum for postseason awards, All-NBA. If that had been in place this year, a third of the All-NBA team and the Defensive Player of the Year, none of them would have been awarded their awards. What was the thinking in making this decision? And you've had some players criticize it's going to water All-NBA down to just an attendance competition versus what do you think the benefits could be?
I'll rephrase your question. If that had been in effect this season, most of those players would in fact have been eligible for those awards. I mean, so we're putting in place an incentive for players to play more games in the regular season. There's no magic to the 65, but we were trying to take into account games, of course, that are going to be missed because they're injuries, and maybe occasionally even it's necessary for a player to rest. But I think there was, again, this is something we negotiated with the Players Association. Everybody has an interest in the league putting its best foot forward in a highly competitive regular season. And that provision, plus some others, I think the play-in, incidentally, had a huge impact at the end of the season. We're adding an in-season tournament. We're hoping those various provisions, plus, frankly, talking more about it as partners with the players, that people will understand that, especially to that earlier question about media, it's a changing media landscape, higher expectations from our fans, different pricing models for fans receiving games, that we're all going to have to, play through the long grind, as Coach Spoelstra called it. But again, finding that right balance. That's why it's 65, not 75, because recognize players are going to get injured. And it may be that even if a player has been injured and is out for a significant number of games, we've all come to the conclusion that player is just not eligible, then therefore for those level awards.
Fourth row, third in, David.
Hey, I'm David Aldridge.
Hey, David.
Athletic. I know that you know and want teams to compete fiercely for championships, but we've seen this particular postseason a number of very successful head coaches get fired after losing playoff series. And I just wonder if you have any level of concern that the desire, the frenzy to win is becoming so great that even people that are proven to be competent and that have won championships, if they lose, they get fired.
I have an enormous level of empathy. I wouldn't say it's concern, because when you look at the numbers, it's actually not that aberrational. You've been doing this a long time too, David, that there is that, revolving door of coaches. What's interesting is some of those same championship coaches, of course, have already been hired on other teams. So it's a marketplace. But again, I think that's something that ultimately has to be controlled by the teams. I am, though, just personally, because I've been at this a long time and they're personal friends, and I think that sometimes I get it from a team or a fan standpoint. You're doing everything you can to win, but it's rough to get fired. It's rough on that coach's family. It requires dislocation. It's embarrassing. But the good news is, seemingly, the great coaches, the ones that have proven track records, get rehired somewhere else. And it may just be not, and I don't think they go from being championship level coaches to bad coaches 1 or 2 seasons later. It's, for whatever reason, that sometimes change is just necessary, a different voice. I mean, we all know how that works. But the good news is, it seems that talent continues to get recognized, and the great coaches get rehired somewhere else.
First row on the right, on the end. Oh, I'm sorry, second row on the right, Steve.
Steve Ashburner, NBA.com. Adam, if I could take you back to when Shaquille O'Neal got drafted, 1992. The salary cap per team was $14 million. And even then, when a coach would get a big new contract, it might be 4 years, $3 million. People would say, well, there's no salary cap on coaches. Given the recent headlines, should there be?
I just give you the other side of the coin, that all really a salary cap is a mechanism for distributing the player's share of the total revenue. So in this case, and I think the coaches would take this deal any day of the week, the players receive roughly 50% of the gross revenue of this league. It's a formula, we call it BRI, but that's essentially how it works. And there's, as you know, all kinds of complexity to the salary cap system, but in essence, you take their 50% share and you divide it by 30, and that's the salary cap. So while it has the word cap as part of it, it's misleading in that it's really it's a sharing mechanism. So and what's so great about this system, one that I inherited, can take no credit for, is it also creates maximum incentives, because when we sit and we're negotiating with the Players Association, we see new opportunities. Take the play-in or an in-season tournament. They're our partners, and 50% of the revenue that we generate from the new activities then go to the players, and it just gets expressed through the salary cap.
In terms of teams being able to compete for coaches now, in a sense, the way they compete for players, a price that's paid now, is that at all in the league's interest to take an interest?
I pay attention to it, but it's a marketplace. We're able to negotiate collectively with the players because they choose to negotiate as a union. The coaches haven't made that election. They could form a union and come and negotiate their agreements collectively, but in the marketplace for coaches, our teams compete individually, and that's where the marketplace takes us.
Right next to Steve.
Hi, Ron Endorf in Israel today. Cover basketball in Europe. I've seen WNBA players, some of them others, play 12 months a year. Given the money in the NBA, doesn't seem so right.
I think you could say it doesn't seem right as a societal matter, but this is a marketplace and it's a business. I don't think it's different than comparing teachers to bankers. We could go down the list, or journalists to players. I mean, what we've, as the NBA, made a decision again. David Stern made that decision to create the WNBA, to fund it at enormous cost, and we continue to support that league. But ultimately, I think the women who play in that league would be the first to say they are not a charity. The goal is to turn this into a sustainable, independent business. The great news is that our commissioner, Kathy Engelbert, together with a strong players association, a fantastic group of women playing in that league, have made tremendous progress, particularly in the last few years. We saw record ratings for this draft that just passed for this, early games so far on ESPN, record ratings. So on CBS as well. So it's happening. It takes a long time, but I would only say we contribute an enormous amount, both in resources and actual dollars, to that league, and hopefully, just as the NBA and certain other sports have grown over time, women's basketball will continue to grow as well.
First row on your right, Joe.
Joe Varden, The Athletic. I have a question about international play, especially in the summers. We've got a World Cup coming. Next year is the Olympics. Our international NBA stars seem to be committed to their country's teams, regardless of tournament, even in off years. The American players are not that way anymore. Would you like to see that reverse back?
Well, I think it's tremendous that the international players are committed to their countries. I think there's, especially in terms of World Cup competition, they grow up in different traditions. Obviously, it's the World Cup of football / soccer. It has very different meaning to them in terms of World Cup. I think we've seen from Americans are more focused on Olympic competition. I think you've seen the commitment from our very best to compete in the Olympics and in certain cycles, the World Cup, and not just once, but multiple times. I mean, frankly, if it were up to me, I think I would take one of those competitions, similar to what they've done in soccer, for example, where I think it's essentially 23 and under for Olympic competition. I think it's too much to create the expectation that every 2 years that our best players are going back out and competing independently in the summer. Putting aside load management for a second, there's no question there's enormous wear and tear. I mean, it goes to the WNBA question about those women playing year-round. Their bodies just can't, you need a rest. And I think here we should work with our federation ultimately, and whether it be the World Cup or whether it be the Olympics, maybe have one where it's unlimited in terms of age and your very best play, and then the other competition is one where your very best, under 23 or something like that compete, and once you've done it, then their expectation is that you continue to compete. The other issue, of course, is internationally. There's just not as large a pool in many of the countries for that competition too. So I think that it's just some of our international players have grown up literally as brothers with some of these players. So I think I wouldn't just call it peer pressure. It's nationalism too, but I think it's just an expectation they're going to be out there competing.
Eighth row in the middle. Mark, if you could just put your hand in the air, please. Thank you.
Hey, Mark.
Mark Spears, ESPN's Landscape. I want to see if you could, give an update on Michael Jordan's talk about potentially selling the team. And in recent years, when the league has made so many great strides in getting in a predominantly black league, African-American GMs and presidents, coaches, there's been a rise. Is there a worry that if Jordan sells, now you'll have a league that doesn't have any black ownership?
Well, one, I'm not going to speak for Michael Jordan. I never will. So let him answer a question what his current status is. I'd only say that just in the same way that, it's wonderful that one of our greatest, Michael Jordan, could become the principal governor of a team. He has the absolute right to sell. At the same time, values have gone up a lot since he bought that team, so that's his decision. And while he is our only principal African-American owner right now, as you know, over the years, whether it's, Grant Hill, who's come in, David Robinson, Shaquille O'Neal on a piece of the Atlanta Hawks, we have, Sacramento Kings for Shaquille O'Neal. That's ongoing. I would love to have better representation in terms of principal governors. It's a marketplace. It's something that if we were expanding, that the league would be in a position to focus directly on that. But in individual team transactions, the market takes us where we will. I will say I know that increasingly our governors are focused on diversity in their ownership groups, just as they are in their front office. And so, the trend lines have been positive over the last several years.
Fifth row, fourth in, Vinny.
Hey, Vinny.
Going back to Ja for a second, when you look at the totality of everything that's transpired, the investigations, the gun incidents, when you look back at that first initial suspension, is there a thought that you might have taken it too light on him from that standpoint, given everything that's happened? Could you have sent a stronger message to maybe be a deterrent to where you are now?
I've thought about that, and Joe Dumars, who was here, was in the room with me when we met with Ja, and he's known Ja longer than I have. It's, for me at the time, an 8-game suspension seemed very serious, and the conversation we had, and Tamika Tremalio from the Players Association was there as well, felt heartfelt and serious, but I think he understood that it wasn't about his words, it was going to be about his future conduct. So I guess in hindsight, I don't know, if it had been a 12-game suspension instead of an 8-game suspension, would that have mattered? I don't know. I know that it seemed, at least, based on precedent, and there is, he's represented, and we want to be fair in terms of the league, and it seemed appropriate at the time. That's all I can say. I mean, maybe by definition, to the extent, we've all seen the video that it appears he's done it again. I guess you could say maybe not, but I don't think we yet know what it will take to change his behavior. Same thing I said at the time. He seems to be, a fine young man. I mean, I in terms of my dealings with him, I think he's clearly made some mistakes, but he's young, and I'm hoping now, once we conclude at the end of our process what the appropriate discipline is, that it's not just about the discipline. It's about now what we, the Players Association, his team, and he and the people around him are going to do to create better circumstances going forward. I think that's ultimately what's most important here.
Take three more. Sixth row in the middle, Simone.
Yes, Simone Sandri, Gazzetta dello Sport. Is there any discussion in tweaking the plane in a way that it doesn't affect the top seed? It seems, for some people, it seems a bit unfair that the team who actually wins the conference would end up playing with the team that it actually is the 7th seed instead of the 8th. Is there any discussion with that?
Yes, there's been discussion to the extent that's an issue that came up from the moment we put in place the structure. Again, I mean, you have the example here, right? We all talk about Miami Heat is the 8th seed, but they started as the 7th seed, and when they went to the play-in, they lost the first game. And some of you may recall, I think they were down to the Chicago Bulls with less than 3 minutes to go, in the second game. So they ended up as the 8th seed. I mean, I think from our standpoint, it's worked. I'm always, though, I've acknowledged that to the extent we should tweak, certainly new things we put in place, we will. I think I'd rather have a few more seasons under our belt before we make additional changes. So right now it's something we're open to new ideas and discussion, but we think it's working pretty well right now.
Next question, fifth row, 2 in, Tanya.
Hey, Adam.
Sorry. Hey, here you go. Hi, thank you.
Tanya Ganguly, New York Times. Do you expect Ja to be available at the beginning of next season?
I'm not going to answer that yet. I think let's wait and see what the conclusion is of our investigation.
All right, final question on the left, 2 in, fourth row.
Over here, Adam, right here.
Yeah.
Tomer Azarli from Clutch Points. I know you guys are always looking at the season schedule and reducing back-to-backs. Teams are still playing 15, 14 back-to-backs, a lot of those on national TV as well. Just curious, what's the discussions or evolution of reducing the number of back-to-backs, especially on the national stage?
Well, it hasn't just been discussion. We've dramatically reduced the number of back-to-backs. We've eliminated, 4 games in 5 nights that used to be, a regularity in this league. And now we're down to math, and then I think it's the trade-off. I mean, we recall 2 seasons ago we played a 72-game season. In a way, I mean, it's not a perfect experiment because coming off the COVID season, so it was condensed in a way that as if we'd changed and taken 10 games off the season. But at least from that season-long experiment, it didn't change resting patterns all that much, and it didn't change injury patterns all that much. And there is an economic factor, of course, that's being balanced in terms of playing a longer season. What's interesting is that, what we saw this year, maybe surprised some, was all-time record attendance. More people attended NBA games than any time in our history. So clearly our fans aren't saying reduce the number of games. Ultimately, to me, as the science gets better on injuries, if we had better data that suggested a shorter season and fewer back-to-backs would make a significant difference, I think we would take that seriously. I mean, of course, the other issue, other than reducing the number of games, you could lengthen the season. But I think, again, in talking to our teams and our players, one, it is already, when you think of when training camp starts, essentially at the end of September, and here we are almost in late June, so we're all still in the same season. Plus, you want to get in a summer league, for the incoming players. That the players also want that chunk of time off on their bodies. That's what we didn't see when we were coming out of the bubble. So it's just something we're constantly balancing. But we're always open as we learn more. And I think that, AI is yet, we'll add a new component to better understanding the data around injuries. That remember with AI, you can also digest video. And I think probably in the not far too distant future, when a player tears his ACL, they're going to go back, over multiple years and, instantaneously through AI and analyze exactly the movement that player was making with his left knee or whatever and conclude whether there's some indicia of something that if only the player were strengthening some muscle or something else could have avoided that injury. So hopefully with all this new technology, we're going to keep our players on the floor longer and we won't need to modify the schedule.
All right, thanks, Adam, and thanks to all of you for being here. Transcripts will be available shortly. Enjoy Game 1.
Yeah.